Okay, so today, we've talked about before, we're going to be talking about hops. I'm going to cover a little bit of the history and botany and how you grow them, where they grow, a little bit about the various types of hop and hop breeding, a bit about processing, evaluating hops, a little bit of chemistry, but I'm going to keep that fairly light. If you want to go deeply into the chemistry, there's plenty of information, and it's not really a good thing to do on a video. And then a bit about hop products and aged hops and flavors from hops. And then there's a few bits of extra information. And a bit of perfect timing, the BJCP sent out a clarification about entering beers in the IPA styles yesterday. So I'll talk about that for a bit. And then a little bit about some competitions and things that might be of interest. Okay, so before we get into the actual content of today, let's start on the beer. First one today is our Jaipur, which is theoretically an English IPA. Though, as we've mentioned already, it's quite American as English IPAs go, especially when you look at its hopping. So let's get that into a glass, and I'll read a bit of the style guide, and then we'll get into what people think. So, overall impression: hoppy, moderately strong, well attenuated British pale ale with a dry finish, hoppy aroma and flavour. Classic British ingredients provide the best flavour profile. So, let's start with some aroma. The description here is a moderate to moderately high hop aroma of floral, spicy, peppery, and citrus orange in nature. Is typical. Slightly grassy dry hop aroma is acceptable, not required. Moderate low caramel-like or toasty malt presence is optional. Low to moderate fruitiness is acceptable. Some versions may have a sulphury note, but this character is not mandatory. The last one's a bit of a strange one because a sulphury note's usually a lager thing, but I've never noticed it in my English IPAs. So does someone who's filling the sheet or would like to dive in on what they've written about the aroma?
Yeah, I've done this one. So I wrote medium malt, medium high hops, and I put medium low sweetness as well. I think it smelled a bit sweet. And I wrote in text floral hops with a hint of citrus, bready, crackery malt with a sweet note to it. I don't know. I gave it a 12 because I thought it matched the description almost exactly.
Anyone else?
Yeah, so I've got kind of a low. I thought it was a low malt, sort of bready malt, and then it's medium hop aroma. I got more sort of citrus, like grapefruit and passion fruit. Some floral in there definitely, and then yeah, just the stuff you need to put: clean fermentation, no esters, no diacetyl, no DMS, very low alcohol aroma, and I didn't get any grassiness. So I'm trying to think of how to score it on the exam really more than.
Yeah, I mean the thing with the exam, as I've mentioned in previous ones, is you're trying to
keywords.
Yeah, get a lot of keywords in there and score-wise match up with the proctors. I mean, the sort of trick. It's almost a trick is to be able to pull out which ones are the various beers that are in there. They're always in there. But yeah, on this, I probably agree on the mix. There's a mix there of floral and some citrus. I'll probably put them fairly close to balance. Low medium malt aroma in the with a hint of some of the caramelly side, and a bit of breadiness. So moving on to the easy one. What does it look like for the head? Yeah, colour ranges from golden to deep amber. It's usually fairly pale, should be clear, though unfiltered dry hop versions may be a little bit hazy. Moderately sized, persistent, off-white head. Yeah, I mean, this is one of the ones you need to find enough words to describe it. And this sort of fulfills pretty much all of those. That's a straw to gold colour, I'd say. It's a light gold. It's on the lighter end of it.
There is a bit of haze to it. It's not brilliantly clear, but again, that's acceptable according to the style guide. So.
Yeah, it certainly isn't a New England style. Right, shall we move on to the flavour? Who'd like to start us off?
No, I can run through again. I got it as a moderately high hop bitterness, moderately high hop flavour, grapefruit, low malt, bready or toast flavour. You got low alcohol. You can taste some there, but it's not particularly in your face. And it's kind of a bitter grapefruit aftertaste. And again, yeah, I didn't detect any sort of esters or off flavors, so, which I would hope you wouldn't in something this standard.
I think there's a touch of fruitiness there that maybe hop derived, maybe something from fermentation, but it's right at the end, which is fine with a UK one. You can have where am I? It's my linger. Somewhat bready option with light to moderate biscuit, like toffee, like caramel aspects. Yeah, medium low to medium fruitiness is fine.
I think for the style, it's although the alcohol is low, like there's definitely quite a hit of alcohol there. I'd say it's probably like more bordering on the medium for the style, perhaps.
Yeah, it's actually. I mean, the style guidelines, so you go up to 7.5% on this, and this is only 5.9. But there's certainly some alcohol there. Any other thoughts? Go on, sorry.
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to add was the citrus. I thought came a lot more in the flavour than it was in the aroma, and the malt was a lot less in the flavour than it was in the aroma, and the sweetness of the malt combined with the hop flavour to give a little bit of tropical fruit kind of flavours, or just generally sweet fruit kind of flavours, which weren't there in the aroma, I thought.
Yeah, it's always good to call back to what you said in the aroma. And what we're looking for a lot here is the descriptors getting good words in there. So there's some good ones in there. So if you're trying to call out citrus, try and pick a fruit. You go for a generic citrus to start with, but maybe call out pineapple, or pineapple's not citrus. Grapefruit or orange is a good one. Lime's quite common. Yeah, in this case, I'd probably push the malt flavors down to somewhere like medium low, probably for my taste. With biscuit, which is a word I've cautioned everyone about a couple of times, because it means something very different to Americans than it does to us. And yeah, a little bit of.
Although you say that in the if you read the definitions at the beginning of the style guide, and it talks about biscuit, then they actually say in there they're referring to like an English digestive biscuit, is what they mean in the style guide, apparently.
Yeah, but
then a lot of Americans probably wouldn't know what that is.
I'd call out a digestive biscuit or something specifically, because exams in particular are likely to be marked in America. And I've had people confused about biscuits. It's one of those things. Yeah, so just be specific on that one. I'd suggest, especially because the more specific you are about the descriptors, the better, usually. With this, there's a little bit of toasty, maybe bread crusty. The thing here, the interesting thing to call out is the sort of finish. It's quite dry, and lingering bitterness is a nice one to call out as well.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. It's almost like the grapefruit pith. It's like afterwards when you fresh grapefruit kind of flavour. Yeah,
those big specific descriptors about bitterness are always quite interesting. You have the herbals, your fruit pith, spicy, always worth calling out. variations in those.
Are we best putting the finish in the flavour section? Because I've put it in the mouthfeel section.
Which bit, sorry?
Are we best putting the finish in the flavour section rather than the mouthfeel section, where on the checkbox sheet, that's where it...
You can do a mix of both. I mean, a lot of it can go in mouthfeel. You're looking more for things like astringency or creaminess or things like that in mouthfeel, where it's more a physical feeling in your mouth. But you can split them either way. I don't think you have problems for doing it either way. I'd probably call out things like lingering bitterness and things in flavour. But then if you get to things like astringency or harshness or very harsh bitterness, where it gets like mouth puckering or tongue drying, that will tend to go into mouthfeel. There is a bit of a blurriness there. Once again, so long as you've got good descriptions, you're unlikely to get marked down in an exam much for that. Cool. Any general thoughts on mouthfeel or overall impression?
I guess the other main thing for me is it's crisp. You know, along with the bitterness, it's a clean, crisp finish to it as a beer. You know, it not just the hops leading it. It's like a Pinbright lager almost. I mean, I don't know whether you go with this being I'm finding this difficult as an English IPA, if I'm honest, because to me it's almost like a light American IPA. But I guess if we're going for it's in the guidelines. It's in the as one. So
yeah, I think once again the thing with Jaipur is they've actually changed the hopping a few times. If you look at its history, it's gone American and English and back to American a couple of times. So I only researched that earlier today, actually yesterday, but yes, it has changed a couple of times. I mean, I'd be happy with this being in probably either category. I mean, I might, if it was entered in English, it's right on the edge of saying this should probably be an American.
That's what I put in the overall impression, is that you're saying that actually I think it might score better as an American IPA. And actually, interestingly, on the back of the label, certainly on my bottle, it says it's an American style IPA.
Yeah, I just saw that too on mine.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things we need to get good at spotting and calling out, is things that are on those edges of being in the wrong category. And this one it wouldn't be marked down a huge amount when it entered as an English IPA, but I do agree it could possibly score higher as an American one.
Because I've always thought of the English IPA as being a bit more malt forward, or at least not malt forward, but a higher level of malt there. I found that this was really the malt was completely overpowered by the hops.
Yeah, I mean, it's supposed to be looking at this. Hoppy, moderately strong, well attenuated pale ale with a dry finish, the hoppy aroma and flavour. I mean, its comparison with American. Pale ales or bitters has less hop intensity and more pronounced malt flavour than the typical American version, which is basically exactly what you were just saying. Yeah, I mean, this is it. This I sort of slightly purposely picked as being an interesting case that you could enter it in either category, and it's probably worth going and looking at something like White Shield to go for a more straight English IPA. But we need to remember that this is your sort of somewhere between your new wave English IPAs and your historical ones in this style description. It really doesn't include your 1980s and early 90s IPAs, which are basically standard and best bitters. So yeah, things that used to be described as IPA, it was just a label on a bitter of some kind or other, and these really aren't covered here.
Yeah, like Green King.
I was purposely not mentioning that one, just out of tax.
Well,
yeah. Okay, so we move on to a bit about hops for a little bit. Most of this is all pretty obvious stuff. Just covering things. I'll be waving a book around in a bit where most of it comes from. that some of you may already have. Other bits come from the hop breeders online, and some of it comes from brewers. So starting with a little bit of Bostonian history, hops are Humulus lupulus, probably originated in Mongolia, but as with all plant things, nobody really knows. Its first mention people have of it is as a salad plant in the 1st century, though I'm not entirely sure what bit of a hop you put in a salad. It might be a quite odd salad. First documents of cultivation are in 736 approximately. I think that's, I haven't written down who that is. But it really wasn't clear whether it was used in beer very much at the time. And that's the time we're talking about Gruit being the primary bittering or flavouring ingredient in beer or ales at the time, which is quite a wide variety of mixes of herbs. Nowadays, people seem to think there's a sort of fixed list of Gruit herbs. There really wasn't at the time. It could be almost anything. You had your sweet gale, bog myrtle, which is all one thing. You've wild rosemary. I've seen examples with things like laurel in them or random bark off trees. It really depended on where you were in the world, what mix of stuff was used for bittering. So from around the 13th century, you start getting more hops in beer. It starts around in Europe, mostly in Eastern Europe. Exact locations are a bit fluffy, but it took until a few centuries later for it to get into UK beers. We're talking really, we get hop yards in the UK from about the 16th century, where you start getting large-scale cultivation of hops. Get good records from the 18th century, from about 1760 odd. We're starting to see hops with great names like long square garlic hop and oval hop that nobody really knows what they are except from genetics. We're trying to work back to what they were. Then the first real hop where we know the name that we still use occurred late 18th century, where a farmer named Golding, strangely enough, picked a particularly good Canterbury White and gave it his own name. That's the first named hop from the UK that's really still around. And by the start of the 20th century, there's probably 80 or so varieties grown around Europe, each in their own particular area. So bits of Germany had their own hops, the UK had their own hops, Czechoslovakia had their own hops, though most of these countries didn't really exist at that time. These fill what's usually known as landrace varieties. This is a generic botanical term or culturing term for a thing that is native to a particular area. So you'll find that term used all around in other things like animals, and you have landrace pigs and things as well. Pretty obviously, the hops are climbing plants that grow on a trellis. Male and female are separate plants. Really, for brewing, we only care about the female. If you get males in your hop yard, you get seeds, and they're a bit of a problem when you're actually trying to brew with it. You don't really want seeds in your hop cones. It adds mass while not adding any flavour. Since we've only got one gender, usually cultivated from root cuttings. I don't know, do any of you guys actually grow hops?
Yeah, I grew Challenger last year. Challenger hops last year is what I grew.
Yeah, so you'll know about the rhizomes you get to start them going. I tried to grow some, they didn't work. One of those things.
Well, I only got 3 grams of dried hops once I dried them this year, so hopefully next year will be better.
Well, the first year you're supposed to get next to nothing.
Yeah, well, I got next to nothing, so yeah.
Okay, so skipping on, covering primarily fairly general stuff. Hops require certain growing conditions. So they're usually between latitudes of 30 to about 52. They usually grow okay degrees. They require 15 hours of daylight in the summer around there, and 120 frost-free days, which you should get in most of that region. They also need a dormant period of cold of about below 4 to 5 degrees, so of about 4 to 8 weeks, which is why you get a cut-off going south. The biggest hop growing regions are fairly interesting. Biggest is still Germany. I haven't got the actual numbers here. Followed by the US, then interestingly China, and the Czech Republic. The UK is a fair way down on the list of overall hop quantities. The list does swap around when you look at the difference between bittering hops and aroma hops, and the details of what the mix is. The mix is gradually going back towards aroma, but a lot of people look at IBU quantity because IBU is actually an internationally tradable thing. So there is a market in IBU, which is what you get for your international light lagers and things, and just buy in some IBU without really caring where they've come from. Yeah, UK is pretty solid for growing hops. We're pushing the northern edge of it here. In the UK, mostly it's around Kent and Hereford and Worcester. Less than it used to be, but they're coming back. And America, I was originally over on the East Coast, but now it's mostly West Coast over in Washington State, with places like Yakima, with all the new hops growing there. Right. I've kept that bit fairly short because it's good to drinking some more beer. And I wanted to get us to still have some of the Jaipur left when we tried the second beer, so we can put them side by side and see what we think. So let's get some of our American IPA into a glass. Okay, so we get through these. I'll probably talk a bit about IPA categories as well, but let's get this American one going. Okay, I have some notes on this one as well, but who would like to start off with looking at the aroma? Just have a quick sniff while I read that bit. So, prominent to intense hop aroma featuring one or more characteristic American or New World hops, such as citrus, floral, pine, resinous, spicy, tropical fruit, stone fruit, berry, melon, etc. Many versions of dry hop have additional fresh hop aroma, which is desirable but not required. Grassiness should be minimal if present. Low to medium low, clean, grainy, malty aroma may be found in the background. Fruitiness from yeast may be detected in some versions, though neutral fermentation character is also acceptable. Restrained alcohol notes may be present, but this character should be minimal at best. Any American or New World hop character is acceptable. New hop varieties continue to be released, but they should not constrain the style. So basically, you're allowed to use any new hop you fancy. So who'd like to start us off with some aroma thoughts?
I was surprised how, I mean, especially in comparison to the Jaipur, how malty the aroma is. I don't know how old this bottle is and whether the hop aroma has faded since then, but the malt is more prominent than the hops, definitely. The first thing that hit me was the sweetness, which is what I wrote straight away. Medium sweetness, medium to low, possibly fruity esters, but that could have come from the hops, I guess. Medium low bready malt. And then I put medium hops, some pine and resin in there, and I wrote cranberries.
That's good. If we can think about descriptors for sweetness, that's good. That's a good one. The ones I've got here is moderate caramel and some brown sugar at the start of the aroma, which is probably describing what you're pulling out there.
I think it gets a touch raisiny. That sort of combination of caramelly sweetness and a bit of a boozy kick gives you that raisiny feel. Aroma.
Yeah, I mean, I was quite surprised that the Jaipur actually came across as more of an American IPA than the Lagunitas. Again, although the best before date on mine says 31st of May, 2018. So can't be that old, I wouldn't have thought, because they don't. So, but yeah, still, it has had to be shipped from the US, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the ones that are shipped from the US do get a little bit of extra malty character in them by the time they've got here. It used to be much more noticeable when you got the rarer American ones came over. They could get quite oxidized, but they've got a lot better recently at shipping them cold. I mean, with you can have some low grainy malty aroma found in the background. Fruitiness from yeast may also be detected in some versions. So really, the sweet carameliness is probably not something you'd be looking for. I mean, the sugar is probably okay. But yeah, I would have knocked it a couple of marks off for that. So anyone else want to throw some thoughts in on aroma?
Potentially the marmalade sort of descriptor there, which we've had before. But yeah, I quite like the cranberry descriptor.
Yeah, no, cranberry is a good term, and yeah, marmalade also works. I've got some medium citrus notes with some orange and lime peel elements, some grapefruit also evident at the end of the aroma. No DMS diacetyl, yada 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 yada. Yeah. So yeah, it's always good to call out those no, this, that, or the other at the end. Though don't use that. If you have more things that are positive descriptors, use those first, but then call out the no anything in any space you have left. Moving on, any thoughts on the appearance?
I put copper with brilliant clarity. And a medium head with moderate retention. It's better retention, I'd say, than the Jaipur, and it's darker than the Jaipur as well.
Yeah, I mean, heads is so.
Mine's flat. Yeah, it's still got. Mine still looks a bit hazy, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, mine looks clear, but yeah, there's an obvious difference in head texture as well. I mean, this has got a slightly rocky head. In the way my pour, but then head varies so much, depends on glassware and the like. That unless it just vanishes, I'd just describe it and not spend too long, wouldn't knock marks off on it. So yeah, I've described this as pale amber to dark straw, moderate ivory head. At this time I would describe it fairly bubbly head with a rocky surface that seems to be holding better than my sample from earlier did. Onwards to take us into the flavour.
I mean, the main thing for me is it's got that sort of what I'd call the sticky quality in an IPA rather than the crisp quality. But how you describe that well, I don't know. I mean, it's that kind of sweetness. without going full sort of caramel toffee. But it's got, yeah, with the fruit, those two things together give you that sort of IPA stickiness.
Yeah, so it's trying something you call out in the balance, perhaps, of it. So you could be call out citrus elements balanced by some malt sweetness or some caramel notes, or probably not in this case, but in some cases you could call out toffee. Some of the more chewy things will head off into the mouthfeel side of things. But you can call out some of those in flavour as well. So any other thoughts? Okay, so what I've got here is citrus elements from aroma come to the fore in the flavour, with orange and grapefruit taking starring roles. This is backed by some grainy bread crust and caramel-like elements, and followed by a firm, lasting herbal bitterness, no diacetyl DMS or acetaldehyde. So there's some spicy notes in there I could have called out as well. And some underlying fruitiness, but you fit what you can in the space. So what do people think of mouthfeel? Is this different? How's this different from the mouthfeel of the Jaipur?
It's not as dry, obviously. It's a lot more slick in the mouthfeel. A lot more residual sugar there than the Jaipur. It gives a sort of, well, as said before, this kind of overwhelming sort of stickiness to it rather than a clean, dry mouthfeel.
Yeah, I definitely would be calling the Jaipur. I'd be calling a light body, whereas this would be low to medium, medium low, somewhere around there. It's still not as chewy as something that gets properly into medium or high. You could go as far as medium, I expect.
Yeah, I had it down as a medium body and medium carbonation. I mean, I've had IPAs that are come across a lot more carbonated.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I mean that's,
or maybe that's just
yeah, I mean that's
yeah.
We're looking here. These can get more carbonated than this, so we're talking. He says finding the right spot. Yeah, so medium light to medium is his body for American IPA is fine. Yeah, medium to medium high carbonation. This example I'd probably have called medium high. It's still bubbling away quite nicely. Yeah, with no harsh hop astringency. Yeah, in mouthfeel, it's always quite good to call out the no this, no the other, because it's actually something that you don't have a huge number of things to say. You get 4 lines to write medium low body with medium to medium high carbonation.
Yeah, I put in this that you got slight alcohol warming. You can tell that it's got alcohol in it, but no astringency and yeah,
no creaminess, no harshness, etc., etc., etc. Yeah, it's worth remembering with each of these sections what the no things are in there, what the flaws are. At least the basic ones, things to fill in.
Yeah, well, it gives you the clue by saying comment on.
Exactly.
And yeah, so as long as you make sure you tick all of them off, particularly when you're doing the exam, then
yeah. So overall, what do people think of? Where do people mark this beer? Approximately, just for interest's sake, filled in the score sheet.
I had it in excellent. I think sort of high 30s, so the 39, I think. So
yeah, I ended up in the low 40s. So yeah, well within judging margins of that.
Yeah, because I mean, yeah, it's one of those that out of the two, I actually thought that the Jaipur was was a better example of an American IPA than the Lagunitas. But again, whether that comes down to the fact this one's been shipped from the US and everything is, yeah, it's difficult to say.
Cool. Term you'll often hear about hops is noble hops, which is actually quite a modern term. It refers to some quite old hops, but the information I have, don't know whether this is entirely true, is it comes about, first appears in about the 1980s, referring primarily to aroma hops, initially obviously to the German ones, all low alpha, all classically used in your German styles. So the classic four are Saaz or Sots, or however you want to pronounce it, Hallertau, Mittelfrüh, Spalt, and Tettnanger. There are a few confusing ones around this because there are Hallertau being a place. There are a whole stack of Hallertau hops. So you'll have Hallertau Magnum, sometimes called Hallertau Magnum. But the one that really fits this category is the Mittelfrüh, and it can come from other places. Another set of hops that are sometimes called nearly noble, which throw in the English ones. EKG, Goldings, and Fuggles, and sometimes some of the other old English ones are sometimes called nearly noble. These terms are a bit confusing. I'd probably be more specific about what the hop is rather than just saying noble hops. Though separating Saaz, Hallertau, Mittelfrüh, and Tettnanger is a little bit hard. Spalt's usually fairly easy. It's a bit different set of spiciness to it. So, yeah, after those, we'll get a quick run through of some of the more historic hop styles. The English classic ones you'll hear in generic beers are the Goldings we talked about, Fuggles, Golding variant, Whitbread Golding variant, is often in British bitters. Some of the other old ones like Bramling Cross have quite an interesting history. So when you first see Bramling Cross appearing in British beers, the brewers complain about it. It has this terrible American twang to it, which they don't like, which is now the prized flavour of the hop. Then we have our newer-ish English ones, like things like Admiral, that have appeared in the past couple of decades. A lot of these originally appeared as bittering hops for the alpha market, but have now come much more to the fore as flavour hops. If you haven't used Admiral, give it a go. It's quite interesting. It's sort of orangey and almost American. There's some new hops coming around. We have experimental ones from our Y experimental hop place that will come through and occasionally get to the homebrew market before they get anywhere else. We've at a couple of events had the guys from hop merchants, the various hop merchants, come and talk to us, and occasionally they have some experimental hops in small quantities, which are quite interesting. Go to the rest of Europe. We've obviously talked about noble hops, but going back to the landrace varieties, and we have, well, not landrace, the older varieties, we have the Styrian Goldings, which are interesting, generally believed to be a Fuggle, but they taste nothing like a Fuggle or a Golding anymore. Now are the star of your Czech beers. Polish hops are usually based off German ones, so I have things like Lublin, which is a Sarzer-based hop, similar in flavour, slightly more herbal in my opinion, but quite interesting anyway. It's worth looking for those ones just for trying something different if you're brewing a lager of some style. Then we have the newer ones. Well, not new, all of these. So we have Hallertau Magnum, which once again, bittering hop, probably best staying as bittering hop. It doesn't make a very good late edition. And all our nice shiny new ones from Germany. So we have our Mandarinas, and the other one, Whole Melon. There's the Hallertau Blanc, which gives some quite interesting fruity flavors. These are trying to follow from The interesting characteristics you've had in American and New World hop breeding and bring them to Europe, whilst trying to stay within the hop growing parameters that are suitable for Europe. So, going to the US briefly, historic American hops are quite interesting because they actually feature a lot in historical British beers. So, those of you who brewed things for the Manchester Homebrew thing we did with Ron Pattinson 6-8 months ago now, will have spotted that a lot of them will contain cluster. Cluster was the East Coast American hop for most of the 19th and early 20th century. Grown in very large quantities, and a lot of it came to the UK because it was cheap, and they had enough space to grow large quantities of it. Grown on the East Coast for convenience of shipping. In the same period and a bit more recently, you have some of the hops that have travelled to and fro, like Northern Brewer, which you'll see in some other more historic American recipes and some of the pre-Prohibition period ones. Classically, you'll see that in California Common, which is the cover name for steam beer, which was basically Anchor Steam for ages, but has now become more common. Damn, didn't need to make that joke. Terrible pun. And then we have our modern hops, which have been purposefully grown for flavour. We have our American ones, like your Citras, your Simcoes, some of which are under patent. So you can actually patent plant, which is a little bit weird if you've bred it yourself. So some of these have very limited growing area. So Citra and Simcoe used to be an absolute pain to get hold of. Some of the New Zealand ones and the Australian ones were Galaxy's getting okay to get hold of now, but Nelson is still a pain because the people who hold the patent for it are restricting the growing area. That's happened a lot with various hops over the years. So it happened with Amarillo at one point, Citra and Simcoe, and a couple of the others. Just as an interesting aside, the sort of example of how you breed a hop, you'll have hop yards full of trellises of a couple of plants, or maybe a row of a cross you're interested in. You'll start with a couple of plants, give them a try. The primary interest is for growing qualities, so people won't even look at the flavour and aroma until they've checked that it grows quickly, has a lot of cones on it. It doesn't get some of the classic hop diseases like powdery and downy mildew. There's some spider mites, and there's all sorts of horrible things that can grow on hops. An example of how this works is Chinook. Going back to two classics, it started with Brewer's Gold, crossed with a wild hop from Utah, which gives you, he says, reading his list, USDA 63102M, which obviously had some interest, but was what a hop people wanted to take further. So they crossed this with a Petham Golding, which is an American Golding from memory, and that combo gives you Chinook. So hop breeders do this all the time. They'll have small single rows or single plants, well, it's usually more than single plants, small group of plants that they cross-pollinate with effectively by hand to get the mixes they want. Then they plant the seeds, start them all, get them going, and try out each one, looking primarily for those agricultural qualities, and then starting to look at the brewing qualities. Often, until recently, people have been literally looking just at IBU because of the market for IBUs was massive. So if you could make a hop that made a vast quantity of IBU per acre, you made a lot of money. If you're growing Sarts, you had to sell it to people making lager, a good lager, because it grew so low on IBU per acre. So you have your hop yard full of hops that you set off growing to actually harvest professionally for the market. historically, we're talking a lot of historical stuff today. Harvesting hops used to be really heavy manual labor. At the hop harvest time, people travelled out from the cities. It was their holiday to go and harvest hops. Sounds like an interesting holiday for a brewer, but quite hard work. For those of you who've been down south of England, you'll have seen oast houses. They were for drying hops, so you'll see these pointy buildings with a sort of white cone at the top with a board that turns it around. That's to get airflow through them. They've now all been turned into holiday cottages, but they were originally for drying hops. But more nowadays, all this nice agricultural stuff has become fairly mechanized. You'll pull the whole plant down and mechanically remove the cones from the bines and go into some fairly large-scale drying facilities for a more consistent process. So you'll get heated air forced through layers of hops about 60 centimeters to a meter thick for 6 to 8 hours just to get them dry. Then you let them cool down for a couple of days and then shove them into bales. The density of hop bales are quite compressed. If anyone's ever seen fully packed up hops, their actual density actually varies from country to country. German ones tend to be a bit looser than English and American ones. Don't know why. So leaf hops will just go straight from the bale to the brewery in sacks, or to the home brewer. They'll get repackaged depending on how good your hop supplier is. Going back a few years, you just get them shoved in paper bags or even plastic bags. You're lucky, and they'll probably be brown by the time you get them. Nowadays, they go straight from the bale into nitrogen flushed mylar bags with the good suppliers. So they say nice and green and fresh, so long as you keep them cool. The other thing that people do to hops is turn them into pellets. This is a pretty simple process. Basically, they're pounded and milled at low temperatures. Basically, they're chilled down to keep the aroma components in good nick, and then shoved into a pellet forming cylinder. This is effectively a sort of drum where you shove the powdered hops in, and then there's some rollers on the inside that force them into pellet molds. There are basically 3 types of pellets that you'll come across. The common one you'll get for home brewing are T90s. They're basically, that means that 90% of the non-resin compounds of the hops are still in there. So a few bits will have been taken out. So mostly things like big sticks and stuff, and a bit of the leaf will have been taken out. Professional level, you'll get things like T45s, which are lupulin enriched, which have had a lot more of the plant material taken out of them. And then for English beers, you get T100s, which are basically compressed plugs of hops. These are the things you drop into your cask just as you're sending it off to the pub to get a bit of old school dry hopping going. Okay, so we've got our bales of hops. I think you'll hear mentioned is the brewer's cut. This is usually a sample that's taken from every 50th bale of hops. It's literally sliced out of the bale. And it's the thing that, as a professional, you'll get to have a look at when you're buying hops in bulk. So to evaluate hops, as a professional brewer, you'd be doing this from the brewer's cut. Normally, you'll just get some of the homebrew shop, or you'll at a brewing event, some of the companies will bring along hops, and this is how you look at them and see how good they are. The first thing to do is have a look at them. Are they green or are they brown? They're brown, that's bad. A lot of pro brewers store their hops fairly badly. So sometimes you'll end up, if you get hops off pro brewers that they don't want anymore, they could be quite brown. And some homebrew shops still sell them in plastic bags of brownness. Try and avoid those. Next thing to look is to have a feel of them. You're looking for moisture, so you're just trying to squish them, see if they spring back out again. Just shows they've still got some moisture in them and haven't totally dried out. Then you get onto the bit you always see people doing, which is actually rubbing them. Really, you do this in sort of 2 phases. You just give them a little rub or maybe a cone, then you smell effectively your fingers and the cone. To start with a little rub, you're looking for the grassy notes that are coming from the hops. This can give you an idea of what will happen in dry hopping. All of these rubbing things are a little bit, they don't give you an absolute feeling of what's going to happen. They'll give you some idea of what's going on. Then after that, you take a handful and they give them a good scrub. Some people rub it between their hands like that. Some people just do it like that. Here, you're looking for the aroma. You're looking for things like pine, mint, citrus, spicy, tropical. Interesting to get things like tomato plant. Sometimes goes over into tobacco-y thing. How these transfer to the actual flavour of the beer is a little abstract, but generally, if you get these aromas, that's a good thing, and you'll always get something fairly positive in the beer. It mightn't match up exactly with what you smelled when rubbing the hop, but it won't be a bad thing. On the other side, if you get dry grass, dead grass, musty flavours, petrol, diesel, tea, cheese, onion, maybe tobacco, that's a bad sign. You probably want to get a different set of hops. I just, give those ones a pass. Some of those flavors are not necessarily a bad thing, but yeah, it's a warning sign, let's say. At which point, you can now try your hops in the beer and see what happens. Okay, time for some Cali-Belgique and see how old it is and see if its hops are old. I picked this one as an example of a specialty IPA. We could have gone with any of the other ones. I'll talk a little bit about specialty IPA when we get to the end, talking about the new BJCP guidelines clarification on specialty IPAs.
This one didn't gush.
Now, gushing can, fairly unusual. I take it you got yours as a can, yeah?
Yeah. The funny thing is, they're from the same place and they were stored exactly the same, but one gushed. But
interesting. Sometimes, if you do get gushing things, it's worth letting the brewer know, especially with our smaller brewers.
It wasn't too bad of a gush, but it was. Yeah, I spilt some, so
yeah.
So this one is one that I did prior to the session. So I put down for the aroma was the Citra aroma, hop aroma, medium to high, low to medium, pepperiness, esters. I initially put aniseed, but then I was more leaning towards spicy and clove after that. With a low to medium malt sweetness, and I put apples on the end as well. But no, there's no caramel noted.
With the apples, it's usually worth calling out the type of apple, just a little bit, whether it's a acetaldehyde green apple going into what we had pumpkin and swede when we tried the off flavor kit, or you're talking your red apples, your nice sweet ones, which are more an ester aroma. But yeah, those are all good call outs. I could go with most of that. So, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I put, it's got a spicy, slightly peppery yeast aroma. I got a low citrus hop aroma and very low grainy malt. I mean, to be honest, this was pretty dead on aroma, other than what you're getting through from the yeast and the malt that probably wouldn't. When it's fresh with a good hop aroma, you may not get so much of. But
yeah, having had this quite fresh before, there were this glass, the Belgian-ness is much more obvious than it is when the hops are much more forward. So yeah, I'd definitely be calling out those spicy notes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I would say this was more of a Belgian golden ale than an IPA at this point.
Yeah, or maybe Belgian blonde or somewhere. But it's put the citrus is a bit out of place for Belgian blonde. But yeah, I think I'd probably be calling out age on it. There's possibly the hops have faded. I'd be pushing for more hop aroma and hop flavour on this, because you're expecting a moderate to high hop aroma, often tropical. So I'm getting a bit of citrus there. It is allowed floral or spicy hops, which you could still have a certain amount of there. It's always difficult to call out what's spicy yeast and what's spicy hop. I think in this case, we're talking mostly spicy hop.
I'm going to jump in slightly with one of the fresher cans, and Sam, you can tell us as well, because I think yours have the same date as mine. I think mine's very citrusy. You don't really get too much of a... The hops are definitely faded. There's no real kind of like fresh grassy quality, but it's like lemon citrusiness kind of like jumps out of it.
The only thing I would say is I don't get that much citrus at all. I think it is quite dominated by the yeast, and I do get a slight banana note from mine, which no one's mentioned. It's not the most prominent thing in there. I definitely think, I don't know, general Belgianiness. but yeah, I agree. It's more Belgian than IPA at the moment without tasting it.
Yeah, I mean, bananas and pears and apples are all in the description for the aroma. Yeah, I just about pull out a little bit of banana. It's not like Hefeweizen or anything, but you could call banana going maybe into strawberry a little bit. So some of those slight the fruity end of flavors you get sometimes with phenolics.
It's so peppery, isn't it? Though it almost feels like it's getting up your nose. That's the level of pepperiness.
I thought Craig's call of clove was spot on as well.
Okay, any thoughts on appearance while we drink it? I mean, for me, this is the haziest one I've had so far this evening.
Yeah, definitely.
I wouldn't call it probably hazy, but it's not crystal clear.
Yeah, I did actually put a note about it being slightly hazy as well.
Yeah, I got pale gold, hazy, white haired, mostly small bubbles. But, I mean, mine fades quite quickly. There's some legs apparent when you swirl it, but yeah, and a little bit of lacing.
Yeah, so as with all these IPAs, you mention the clarity, but almost every one of them will say fair to slightly hazy is fine. So it's not a case of knocking points off them in any way. Appearance is only 3 points. So it's you'll knock a point or two off there for ones that either look like soup when they're not supposed to, or their head totally just is not there at all. Thoughts on flavour?
So I've wrote this already. So I've got it down as medium malt sweetness, a medium to high bitterness, which is long lasting. Orange and tangerine flavors. Bitterness with the tangerine reminds me of the rind peel of the actual tangerine. You know, the sort of whiteness of it. The pepperiness from the aroma continues into the fruit of the flavor as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think peppery's a really good descriptor. The clove, it's like a bitter wheat beer to me. I think that's probably unfair because the hops have faded, and I think with some sort of fruitiness from the hops, it could be a good beer. But yeah,
I think that's why I went with tangerine, because it's kind of less orange, like less of an orange. It's a bit weaker, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I actually had it down as a fairly restrained hop bitterness because it's just not. It's not all that bitter, and again, I think, whatever handling or age it has, I mean, it's past its best before date, obviously. So I can't really. But obviously, in a competition, you wouldn't know that. But yeah, that's just I've got to mark it how it is.
Yeah, I mean, this is quite almost a little bit astringent in its finish. But I'm guessing if these are a year old, it's early days for Stone Berlin as well. So we might not have got some of the best beers that they've done since.
I think Craig's call of orange pith or tangerine pith is a good one because that's slightly astringently bitter. So yeah, I'd be the only thing that's not mentioned. I'd probably be calling out some of the grainy things because behind that pepperiness was a light grainy sweetness, maybe a hint of a very pale caramel, but that's maybe my taste buds. I think the main thing is still getting a good description out there and covering all the main points. Any thoughts on the bitterness there about describing that?
I think saying again, mine and Ross's cans are a bit fresher than everyone else's. I would say the bitterness in this one is medium high. It is quite bitter. I've had this quite fresh in California, and I don't really like it now. I didn't really like it then. I think the hop Belgian yeast combination just clashes and isn't particularly nice. It's quite difficult to describe it in some ways when you're not enjoying it.
Yeah, I mean, this is
that the actual guidelines state that it's quite hard to balance the correct hops with the Belgian yeast as well.
Yeah, this is one of the trickier ones to brew because Belgian yeast and the hops can clash horribly, and often do. Cool. So, any other thoughts on this beer, on mouthfeel, or an overall impression, overall score?
I think in terms of a description of the overall impression, what Craig said earlier on about the tangerine pithiness, the combination of the level of bitterness, whatever hops are left for anyone's cans, and that Belgian yeast does give an overwhelming sort of pithy, fruity feel to it.
I think that's probably a good call on the pithiness and the fruitiness. I mean, yeah, with the overall impression, yeah, I'd be commenting on the lack of hop in the example I've got.
Yeah.
I'd probably be saying I might go on the age thing because a lot of the things you get on homebrew competitions have either there's something people have had around or they've had some bad handling in transport. So it's always with your comments, you always need to be nice to the person. It's not really their fault. Something may have gone wrong in between. So you're giving positive advice for things they can improve on. There have been examples of people giving terrible feedback. I've mentioned before things like there have been a score sheet which someone just wrote Y on and nothing else. That was a pro brewer, not a judge, but there we go. But you're trying to give positive feedback. So in this case, I'd be probably commenting on increasing the hops late in the boil, possibly something about dry hopping, and possibly about age of the sample and maybe something on storage, because it could be an oxidation thing, losing some of the hops. But you also keep your wording around perhaps, maybe, have you considered, rather than do this.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really get any of the paperiness you'd expect if it was badly oxidized. So, I mean, I did, kind of put in that the hops were on the low side of what I'd expect. And then say, to look to increase the aroma, possibly late hop additions, like you said, dry hopping. And yeah, I mean, I didn't actually call out it might be old. I didn't know whether that, is that something valid to...
It's worth...
be an old sample.
It's worth mentioning, just in case it is. It maybe a younger version of this might have been better, or try this. It's one of those things that you're making a comment that is something that's in the control of the brewer, but it may have been a better beer earlier. So it doesn't do any harm to call it out.
I think it's quite a good one to do, actually, because you might just validate it. As long as you say it might be, or it possibly is you might just validate something that the brewer already knew.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's valid. Yeah, because I mean, I know certainly myself, I've had, you know, when, you know, see competition come up that you hadn't prepared for, and you suddenly, yeah, okay, well, I've got this
Yeah, you put something that
still
you-
in a crate in a garage. Yeah.
Yeah, I've done that quite a few times. So I've entered 3 entries in this competition. What the hell have I got left to actually put into it? Let's zip through a few more things on hops. I'm not really going to deeply cover the actual use of hops in the process because that's next week where we're going to go through wort production. But let's cover a few more things. Obviously, everyone knows the bittering ingredients in hops are alpha and beta acids. As I mentioned earlier, alpha acids are a globally tradable commodity. Alpha acids are humulone, cohumulone, and adhumulone, which are obviously isomerized in solution by heat, i.e., you boil it, which forms 6 isohumulones. So for each one, you have a cis and a trans isohumulone in the chemical meaning of both those terms. Historically, by historically I mean 10 years ago, people used to blame cohumulone, high cohumulone hops for harsh bitterness in beers. There was a little evidence for this. So a lot of people went to a lot of efforts to get low cohumulone hops. But now people have started doing more blind trials of it and failing miserably to prove that it was actually the case. So there seems to be a lot less concern at the moment about cohumulone, which probably brings a lot more hops back into play for interesting things. People always talk about beta acids in hops, but beta acids are not very soluble, and they don't isomerize. So they're not as they are. They're a fairly minor impact on bitterness. But that said, some of their oxidation products are quite bitter and are soluble. So depending on the age of your hops and how they've been handled, beta acids may become important. But it's pretty hard to know what they're going to do. The bittering compound you're looking at here is hulipinic acid, which is a really good name. Now, as everybody knows, we have really good ways of working out the bitterness of beer in our brewing software. No. Basically, the IBUs, the international bittering units, are a bit of educated guesswork. So there are 3 formulae in common use. The ones you'll normally see are Tinseth, Rager, and Garetz. Some of these are quite old. Some of them have some passable research behind them. Some of them less so. So the one I know most of the research about is Tinseth, because he's actually active on various internet forums. You can actually talk to him occasionally, and he did a whole series of experiments actually measuring the bitterness for various hop utilization profiles in a single set of kit. And most of his data is fully available. And he also gathered a lot of data off brewers about what they did and their measured IBU. This has sort of made him his formula the most commonly used one at the moment. But obviously, it really doesn't match reality very closely. It's so dependent on your brewery, your brewing process, how you use the hops. The suggestion here in general is just to pick a formula, pick a setup and use it. And then if your beer is too bitter, go lower. If it's not bitter enough, go higher. Do any of you use any particular formulae or?
Yeah.
Brewer's Friend.
I use Tinseth from in Beersmith. But again, yeah, he was on it was Experimental Brewing podcast a little while back and talked about it, and yeah, what he was saying is actually all the experiments he did, he only ever used whole leaf hops. He didn't use pellets, and so he was saying, well, a lot of this is being taken completely out of the context in which he did it. It was done on his equipment with whole leaf hops quite a while ago, when probably hops weren't of the same standard as they are now and everything else. So, you know, he's quite open to saying, yeah, it's not perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I heard the same podcast. yeah, he seems a nice chap, and you can, yeah, I've seen him talking in other forums about it. But really, these things are just a guide to give you some idea or relative idea of how bitter things are. If people have sent in beers to competitions with descriptions that say 91 IBU, that's meaningless. You can probably go high bitterness, and that will probably just cover it. So yeah, don't pay much attention to actual non-chemically measured IBU measurements, but they're useful numbers. So as your hops sit around, the IBUs do start to drop. If you keep them stored well, i.e. without any oxygen at a cold temperature, they don't fall off very fast. But if you keep them in your loft during the summer in a paper bag, then you won't end up with any IBUs left, and they will taste of cheese, which is one of the interesting off flavors that develops in hops over time. But it comes and then goes, the sort of cheesy thing, because if you're doing things like lambics, you're looking at using old hops post the cheesiness stage. I have tried in the past doing heat-aged hops for lambics. Really don't bother. They don't lose their bitterness fast enough with heat. And the lambic ended up being meh. But you can, off some of the brewing suppliers now, buy pre-aged hops. I.e. they just buy old hops off whoever they can buy them off and selling them for a markup. It's not that much of a markup, but yeah, it is. Otherwise, other things to think about on hops and how you can get them is about hop extracts. Years ago, there was one sort of hop extract, the ISO, the CO2 ISO extract, or the solvent extract, which just gave you bitterness. This is a really quite useful thing to have, primarily if you're doing some of the big American double IPAs and things, because if you used whole leaf hops, you would end up squeezing them out to actually get enough bitterness into them, doing the more West Coast style IPAs, the bitter, clear ones. Using a bit of extract can help there for the ISO ones, but now you also get the hop aroma extracts. Look quite interesting. Personally, I've tried them. I'm not a huge fan. I think they're a bit grassy, but they do add a nice element. Definitely worth trying. There's also things like the cryo powders around now that apparently have high aroma extract. Once again, have a go. I haven't actually tried those yet. So skipping away from hops for a moment, I'm going to go back to IPAs. First of all, a little bit about the IPA specialty categories before I get onto the BJCP update on them, which I sort of going to skim into. Basically, these categories are supposed to be the things that are being brewed now. They're not there for things that we categorized into other categories. It's not an exhaustive list, but you can see some basic styles in there that are around. It will be expanded over time. And actually, I'm just going to read some of this. So this current update came out in the last BJCP judging newsletter, which you can find on the internet. It's publicly available. I'll put the link to this particular bit into the comments when I've done this edited video. So the big one is that specialty IPAs in a distinct style. It's a competition entry category. These are not experimental beers. They're a range of currently produced beers that may or may not have any market longevity. Only common element is they have a balanced overall impression of an IPA, typically an American IPA, but with some minor tweaks. That's actually what it says in the current guidelines, but a lot of people ignore it. So things like it's not really designed as a catch-all category. So it's not. So if you have a mango IPA, that's a fruit beer. At this point, New England IPAs are an example of a specialty IPA because it has fairly clearly defined characteristics such as haze, increased hop aroma, decreased bitterness, and a rather full creamy body. A lot of beers entered here fall into several problems where they haven't really read the guidelines. So yeah, as we said, classic IPAs with additional ingredients such as fruits or spices are specialty beers, so fruit beer or spice beer. IPAs with unique hop or experimental hops are just an IPA. One-off IPA experiments are an experimental beer or a specialty beer. So if you think you're entering a Weizenbock IPA, it's a mixed style beer. Until they actually get some level of commercial acceptance. So Hopfenweizen is one of these sort of questionable beers that could be called a specialty IPA, could be called an experimental beer. It may well appear as a specialty IPA at some point. That was a little bit unclear. Yeah, when you're judging these, you're sort of trying to give a little bit of benefit of doubt. So if they made a reasonable attempt to enter in the right category, judge the beer as it was entered. Don't look at reasons or excuses just to disqualify it. But you could write in your comments, this should be better entered as an experimental or an XYZ beer. At the bottom of the list here, there's a list of sort of should this beer be entered as an IPA, a specialty IPA. So things like an IPA aged in a barrel. No, it's a wood-aged beer or a specialty wood-aged beer. Historical IPA from a certain period. No, that's a historical beer. And so on. There are examples that are. So an American IPA brewed to session strength. Yep, that's a specialty IPA. Because within a specialty, you can define the strength and the base style, the style, among other things. So it's probably worth reading through that description. I'll put a link to it in the comments below. Yeah, so in judging IPAs, this is often one of the biggest categories in a competition. It's got less so over the past couple of years, but often American IPA and specialty IPA will be among the biggest categories. This is one of the trickier ones to judge because you will get your taste buds will be hammered by the fourth or fifth one. So often we'll split the flight down a little bit more than usual and have quite a lot of judges on it and run them a little bit slower so you get enough time to drink some water, eat some crackers or whatever we've got to clean your taste buds. As with a lot of these, it's often worth going back to the first beers you've tasted and going back, looping back, just to recompare them later on in the session because your taste buds will have changed in sensitivity, especially to bitterness over the session. So it's quite a tricky one to judge. And also a lot of people enter it and you will end up with a lot of possibly rubbish beer. You do end up with it being quite hard to give some constructive feedback at the end of this one. So it's a fun category to judge, but sometimes I've purposefully avoided it by entering an IPA. When judging, it is a technique to enter a defensive beer to stop you having to judge a category. Okay, so that was basically the core stuff on a little bit of IPAs, bit around hops, and trying some IPAs. Now, there are a couple of other things I wanted to mention. Oh, yeah, first things first, the book. If you really want to know about hops, it's all in that one. Possibly more than you ever want to know about hops. But it's a good book, as is that whole series of the hops, malt, water, yeast sequence. Definitely worth getting hold of or borrowing.